This is going to be the story of 2022 for sure. Right before, I guess, the big case between Elon and Twitter is about to happen, I guess, in October at some point, a Twitter whistleblower has come forward and dropped a nuke into the middle of what was basically the story of the year in business, I think. The former head of security, hired by Jack himself, and incredibly well-respected Peter Mudge, Zatko, he's referred to as Mudge, one of the most respected people in the security industry, again, recruited by Jack in 2020 after a team of hackers, you may remember, took over all these verified accounts, Obama, Biden, and Elon's account as well. And he was head of security until January of this year, 8 months ago. And he claims through explosive documents, a huge document dump, that these Twitter executives ignored multiple security vulnerabilities. Now, why is this important? Well, obviously, if Obama, Biden, and other heads of state have their Twitter handles, they could say something that could cause an international incident, and that's actually happened with hacks before. He also says they were not following even the most basic security protocols, like safeguarding staff access to core software. Of course, all of this comes after there were Saudi infiltrator spies, essentially, inside of Twitter. I mean, the list of things here that he is alleging is truly colossal. He dumped these documents to the Department of Justice, the SEC, Congress, and the Washington Post. He alleges that the vulnerabilities make Twitter extremely vulnerable to foreign spies hacking and disinformation campaigns. And perhaps most importantly to the acquisition, the complaint also adds that Twitter's policy towards fake accounts incentivized, quote, deliberate ignorance by undercounting spam accounts and giving bonuses to execs for increasing users but not finding bots. Sachs, your thoughts, on this? You talked about your subpoena or whatever that was.
No, it's a subpoena. I'm being depositioned. It's
you're having a deposition?
Yeah, they want to depo me too, which is kind of amazing. But let's save that because I think this is more newsworthy. So you'll recall on a previous show we talked about this idea that if Twitter sues Elon to go after the kill fee or to go after damages, the question will very rapidly become about whether Twitter has a bot problem, and will discovery reveal documents that show that Twitter executives knew or should have known there was a problem. And so I said, the question will very rapidly become, what did Twitter executives know and when did they know it? Now, I couldn't have predicted that this whistleblower would come forward, but what he's basically saying is not only is there a bot problem, there's a cover-up of the bot problem. He's accusing the company of positively Nixonian tactics here. So just to build on what you said, J. Cal, he said that Twitter executives don't have the resources to fully understand the true number of bots on the platform, and their executives are disincentivized to count them properly because doing so would negatively affect their bonuses. So I didn't know that their bonuses were in any way tied to this bot issue. So he's making the Upton Sinclair argument that it's hard to get a man to understand a problem when his salary depends on not understanding it. So that's part of what he's saying. He's also saying that he's accusing Twitter CEO Parag Agrawal directly. Let's just say these are allegations, right? These are not proven yet. But here's what he's saying. Basically, he's saying that Parag and his lieutenants repeatedly discouraged him from providing a full accounting of Twitter's security problems to the company's board of directors. They basically prevented him from producing a written report. He also says that the company's executives ordered him to knowingly present cherry-picked and misrepresented data to create the false perception of progress on urgent cybersecurity issues. He also alleges that they went behind his back to have a third-party consulting firm, their report scrubbed to hide the true extent of the company's problems. And as a result of this, he's basically saying that Twitter executives committed securities law violations by making material misrepresentations and omissions in SEC filings. And this is what got Elon to sort of commemorate Zatko's revelations with one of his trademark memes, which was the meme of Jiminy Cricket singing "Give a Little Whistle" from the film Pinocchio.
Which I think becomes the cold open here.
Which just became our cold open. So yeah, look, these are very serious allegations. They're not proven yet. He's working with the same group who worked with Frances Haugen. And I certainly question some of the things she was saying. So I'm not going to automatically accept on faith everything he's saying. But I think by the same token, because he's working with groups that back Frances Haugen, who was very much not on the free speech side of this debate, I also think you can't just accuse this guy of being an Elon stooge. This guy is a respected cybersecurity authority. He's one of these like white hat hackers. He's somebody who was an early hacker.
Literally, if you were to ask before all of this, before he worked at Twitter, like, who would you want as your chief security officer? Give me a short list. He'd be on it for any company.
Right.
One of the most respected people who points out vulnerabilities. And Chamath or Freeberg, I have a question about corporate governance and what seems to be a dysfunctional relationship here. You have Jack hires somebody to solve the security problems. Then when presenting to the board, he's not allowed to tell the truth. And the board has given incentives to the management team. He's a top 5, top 7 member of the management team. So what's going on here with this dysfunction where he's hired to tell the truth, to fix the problems? The board is turning a blind eye to it. And maybe the management team is not giving the board the data they need to make better decisions. How do you game theory this? Yeah.
I'm not sure that you can come to all those conclusions.
Yeah, I'm not coming to the conclusion. My mind is wandering of how this dysfunction comes up. Yeah.
I read parts of his Whistleblower. I can't claim to have read it all. It actually isn't super supportive of Elon's case. The most problematic thing that he points out is the following, and this is a quote from his complaint. He said, Twitter, quote, already doing a decent job excluding spam bots and other worthless accounts from its calculation of MDAO. At best, he's alleging that Twitter omitted details, not that it lied directly. So if you kind of take that, I think what he's really pointing his sights on are, as you said, disclosures that have nothing to do with the spam issue, but have a lot to do with security. And that is something that typically in a public company board filters up through the audit committee, typically, that gets a readout, right, once a quarter from the right people who talk about, here's our cybersecurity threats and vulnerabilities. And then there is a readout from that committee chair to the board. And then those are noted in your quarterly reports that the secretary writes down. So I think part of why this guy may not have had the audience is it was also written that he was a pretty terrible manager, and there were hundreds of people in his organization who were just kind of running here and there. And so, you guys have all been in the situation where we hire somebody who is an exceptional performer, and then we miscast that person by putting them in a point of leadership and being a team manager versus a single kind of like product or engineering expert. And it seems that there was a part of that at play as well, which decayed the ability for management to actually have enough faith and trust in this guy to put him in front of the board. So, and that's all that's just come out in the last few days. So I don't know, my reading of the whistleblower claim is really that this is the kind of thing that companies like Facebook and Google and others have had issues with the FTC in the past. They typically settle those claims. They pay a fine, snap. But those things take 3 to 5 years to play out. So I suspect that this body of content more leads to that outcome than is a smoking gun that really helps Elon. In fact, the fact that he's actually affirmatively stating that their calculation of MDAO is actually pretty decent actually hurts the claim that Elon is making.
I don't know if I agree with that, actually.
Okay, go ahead, Sax.
So I agree with Chamath that the claims he's making are far broader than the bot issue and far broader than the issues that Elon's raised. So I agree with you about that, Chamath. However, I don't agree that what he's saying isn't specifically helpful to Elon's case. So what he said is, so this is from a CNN business article, he said, Zacco's disclosure argues that by reporting bots only as a percentage of MDAO, rather than as a percentage of total number of accounts on the platform, Twitter obscures the true scale of fake and spam accounts on the service, a move Zacco alleges is deliberately misleading. And then CNN
So wait, what you're saying here, Sachs, just to do the math, the denominator matters here. If the denominator was all accounts, the percentage of bots would be much higher. If the denominator is monthly MDAOs, whatever they created, it would be a much lower denominator and the percentage would change. I think is what
I'm just reporting what CNN is reporting in terms of what Zacco's alleging. I just want to get it out on the table. CNN broke the story along with one other news source.
Washington Post.
Washington Post, yeah. Basically what happened is this guy got fired in January and started working with these whistleblower lawyers. They put together a big report, and then that report got leaked to the Washington Post and CNN, as well as people on Capitol Hill. So that's kind of what happened here. So CNN goes on to say, Zacco says he began asking about the prevalence of bot accounts on Twitter in early 2021 and was told by Twitter's head of site integrity that the company didn't know how many total bots are on its platform. He alleges that he came away from conversations with the integrity team with the understanding that the company had, quote, no appetite to properly measure the prevalence of bots, end quote, in part because if the true number became public, it could harm the company's value and image. So this is, again, the Upton Sinclair problem that they're
then at a minimum, David, you have to agree, this guy is basically speaking on both sides of his mouth. I mean, these are both direct quotes from his complaint. So his complaint at best is very confusing and a little schizophrenic.
Well, it's also just coming out. So there'll be more data that comes from
by the way, I'm not saying that I believe him or disbelieve him, but I'm saying if you look at the quotes aren't the smoking gun one would want if one was trying to look. I think we have to remember the lawsuit has really nothing to do with this problem. The lawsuit really boils down to one very specific clause, which is the pinnacle question at hand, which is there is a specific performance clause that Elon signed up to, right? Which, his lawyers could have struck out and either chose not to or, couldn't get the deal done without. And that specific performance clause says that Twitter can't force him to close at $54.20 a share. And I think the issue at hand at the Delaware Business Court is going to be that, because Twitter is going to point to all of these gotchas and disclaimers that they have around this bot issue as their cover story. And I think that really, this kind of, again, builds more and more momentum in my mind that the most likely outcome here is a settlement where you have to pay the economic difference between where the stock is now and $54.20, which is more than $1 billion, or you close at some number below $54.20 a share. And I think that is like, if you had to be a betting person, that's probably, and if you look at the way the stock is traded, and if you also look at the way the options market trades, that's what people are assuming, that there's a $7 to $10 billion swing. And if you impute that into the stock price, you kind of get into the $51 a share kind of an acquisition price. Again, I'm not saying that is right or should be right. That's just sort of what the market says.
Friedberg, what's your take on this? Do you find this person credible, highly credible, and how damaging do you think this is to Twitter, independent of the deal to sell the company?
I think there's two tests. One is the materiality of what they've reported. So, and really that comes down to just the MDAO reported numbers. So if there really is some knowing misstatement based on what he's saying, that's an issue. The other one is the duty of care responsibility of the board, meaning did the information that he's providing actually find its way to the board? If it was blocked by management, it's a judgment call on, whether or not management was trying to deceive or whether they were trying to investigate and identify more. If the information was brought to the board and the board did not act, then there's an issue with the boards meeting their duty of care responsibility as fiduciaries of the company. And that's really what...
He did pitch the board at some point or explain this to the board, but not in writing.
If what he's claiming did not make its way to the board, then it's hard to say that the board was in breach of their duty of care. If the CEO... I agree with that. And if the CEO blocked it, then there's a question on then the CEO can be fired, right? Then there's a good case for the CEO to be fired. I see, probably one of three scenarios here. One is, nothing happens. Two is that the board is actually violating which I doubt, knowing this board. I mean, knowing who's on this board, it's probably more likely that the CEO or some executives that block this information from getting to the board then has to act now that they have the information, and they say, hey, you blocked this information from getting to us, we need to act. And maybe they remove the leadership that was responsible for that.
Sachs, in terms of board governance, how much of this has to do with the fact that nobody really owned on the board any significant equity in Twitter?
Is that true?
Yeah. I mean, Jack on the board was the highest, right? He owned 2 or 3%.
How much did Silver Lake own? Jack owned Silver Lake. Egon's on the board. I mean, they're owners on the board, right?
The majority of the board, were low.
To be clear, Zacco doesn't seem to be pointing his finger at the board. In fact, quite the contrary. He's saying he wasn't allowed to present to the board in the amount of detail that he wanted in written form like he wanted. So in a way, he seems to be exonerating the board. He is pointing the finger at Twitter executives. And the timeline here is instructive. Basically, what happened is he was hired by Jack Dorsey back when Jack was CEO. This is in, I think, November of 2020. And at that time, Jack had Zacco report directly to him. He actually took responsibility away from these issues, away from Parag, who was running engineering, gave it to Zacco. Zacco reported directly to him. Now, fast forward about a year later, and Jack steps down. Parag becomes CEO. And then 2 months later, Parag fires Zacco. And it's in that time period, that couple of months, where Zacco alleges that he's prevented from providing a written report to the board, that Twitter executives instruct him to cherry pick, that they basically try to amend this third-party consulting firm's report in order to make the situation look better, in order to hide the extent of the company's problems. So I think the allegations, as far as they go, are mainly a problem for Twitter executives. And look, I don't know the truth of these things. They're just allegations. I think this guy is a respected sort of white hat hacker in the cyber community. At the same time, I don't know, maybe he is a bad manager, or maybe there are other reasons for removing him.
Could be a bad manager and could be telling the truth, right?
Yeah, and you can't ignore the fact that under whistleblower laws, if Twitter gets fined as a result of these allegations, he could get 30%. So listen, we don't know the truth of it. However, I do think that this whole thing is a windfall for Elon's case, because it does seem to provide substantiation for Elon's assertion that there's a bot problem at Twitter. Now,
and a cover-up about it.
Exactly.
Yes.
And a cover-up that would basically potentially invalidate the company's SEC disclosures on the subject.
Yeah, it's
now,
explosive.
there's a question of law and a question of fact with regard to Elon's case. So in other words, at the end of the day, what they're going to be litigating in Delaware is a contract dispute. Is Elon contractually required to close? And Elon's assertion is, I'm not, because of this bot issue. So there's a question of law where if everything Elon says about the bots is true, is he required to close? And I don't know what the legal ramifications of that are. But I think with respect to the question of fact, which is Elon right about the bot issue? There's no question that this is a bombshell that can only help his case.
By the way, to your point, the stock was kind of pricing in a 70% likelihood of this thing closing if you looked at just how all this stuff was trading. And it went down to 60% once that whistleblower report came out and people had a chance to digest it. So to your point, it definitely moved the goalposts a little bit toward in Elon's favor.
There is an important thing to point out here, which Sachs just touched on. There is a whistleblower program that was created in 2012 and by the SEC as part of Dodd-Frank, I believe, or in part of the evolution of Dodd-Frank. And they've given out now over $1 billion in whistleblower awards. These awards come out of the SEC fine. So you often wonder, like, hey, they give this huge SEC fine. Who got it? Well, it turns out whistleblowers now are massively incented, because if you're a whistleblower, it's a career-ending, potentially.
Jason, you're not saying the other part, which is when you go to these organizations to now help develop a whistleblower lawsuit, what has actually happened is you're not whistleblowing moral or ethical breaches. You're whistleblowing things that can come back to an issue that the SEC and the FTC can make an issue of, because that's where the financial fines come, and that's where the remuneration and motivation. So, for example, like you could have a company that's illegally, killing dogs. Horrible. But the whistleblower claim will be about, their disclosures in a 10K.
Of how many dogs they killed to the SEC. Right. In this case, what did they tell and that's why he gave this to the SEC DOJ. The other interesting wrinkle here, and by the way, there's been the whistleblower program, I did a bunch of reading on it this week. They also don't disclose who the whistleblowers are. So this isn't a case where you have to come out like Francis did or Mudge did. A lot of these awards are being given quietly. There's been 2 rewards over $100 million, and they don't say what the award was based on. Who the whistleblower is or who the company is. They've been doing this in a very stealthy way, and it seems to be highly effective. The big difference, I think, with Francis compared to this one is Francis is just a PM, who was not a top 5 or 10 employee, not even close to that. This is a top 5, top 7 employee who had access to the board and was giving reports to the board, at least orally.